Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this morning's update on Hurricane Helene. So, Hurricane Helene is beginning to rapidly intensify in the eastern Gulf of Mexico, and looking at the 10 a.m. update, Hurricane Helene now has maximum sustained winds of 105 miles per hour, gusts up to 125 miles per hour, is moving to the north-northeast, and has a minimum central pressure of 960 millibars. Hurricane Helene had winds of 85 miles per hour 1 a.m. last night, which means it has intensified 20 miles per hour within a 9-hour period. Taking a look at the latest cone for Helene, as we go into 7 p.m. this evening, Helene will intensify further to a 120 mile per hour Category 3 major hurricane with 150 mile per hour gusts moving to the north, and we're going to be looking at landfall sometime around 5 to 6 p.m. this evening, just south of Tallahassee, Florida, likely as a high-end Category 3 hurricane. Personally, I am not expecting a Category 4 hurricane anymore, since we do have some wind shear, thankfully, that is acting on a Hurricane Helene that should keep it below that Category 4 status, but Category 3 high-end still going to produce devastating impacts across the Florida Big Bend. Going to move right over Tallahassee probably around 7 to 8 p.m. this evening, up through western Georgia, and as we go into tomorrow morning 7 a.m., we are going to have a 65 mile per hour tropical storm with 85 mile per hour gusts situated over the city of Atlanta, bringing well over hurricane force gusts to the city, likely resulting in wind damage in the city of Atlanta. Moving to the northwest, and then pass over Chattanooga and stall over northern Tennessee as we go into 7 p.m. tomorrow, 35 mile per hour winds, 65 mile per hour gusts, moving to the west. Then going into 7 a.m. Saturday morning, 30 mile per hour winds, 40 mile per hour gusts, moving to the south-southwest. Then going into Saturday afternoon or Saturday evening, 25 mile per hour winds, 35 mile per hour gusts, moving to the east-southeast. And then going into Sunday morning, 25 mile per hour winds, 35 mile per hour gusts, just kind of just dissipating west of Nashville, Tennessee. This will produce a lot of rainfall across the Tennessee Valley, resulting in a lot of flooding, unfortunately, as well. So taking a look at our watches and warnings, we have tropical storm warnings pretty much for the entire Florida Peninsula, eastern and northern Georgia, eastern Alabama, the western Florida Panhandle, the entire state of South Carolina, and southwestern North Carolina in the yellow. And we have hurricane warnings in the pink areas across much of the Florida Big Bend and the Panhandle, including Tallahassee just west of Gainesville, Dothan, Alabama. You're under a hurricane warning, and hurricane warnings extend all the way up to Macon, Georgia. Hurricane warnings extending over 100 miles inland across Georgia due to the fast-moving nature of the storm. So, hurricane impacts are going to be felt a couple of 100 miles inland, unfortunately, as Hurricane Helene moves into Georgia. So, and also, before I move on, storm surge warnings all the way from Panama City Beach down through the Florida Keys in the blue area, including Tampa Bay, Cape Coral, and the entire Big Bend. So, taking a look at the key messages for Hurricane Helene, a catastrophic and deadly storm surge is likely along portions of the Florida Big Bend coast, where inundation could reach as high as 20 feet above ground level, along with destructive waves. There is also a danger of life-threatening storm surge along the remainder of the west coast of the Florida Peninsula. Residents in those areas should follow advice given by local officials and evacuate if told to do so. Potentially catastrophic hurricane-force winds are expected within the eyewall of Helene when it makes landfall in the Florida Big Bend region this evening. Preparations to protect life and property should be rushed to completion. Damaging and life-threatening hurricane-force winds, especially in gusts, will penetrate well inland over portions of northern Florida and southern Georgia later today and tonight, where hurricane warnings are in effect. Strong wind gusts are also likely further north across portions of northern Georgia and the Carolinas, particularly over higher terrain of the southern Appalachians. Catastrophic and life-threatening flash and urban flooding, including numerous significant landslides, is expected across portions of the southern Appalachians through Friday. Considerable to locally catastrophic flash and urban flooding is likely for northwestern and northern Florida and the southeast through Friday. Widespread significant river flooding and isolated major river flooding are likely. Very strong wording continuing from the key messages mentioning catastrophic and deadly storm surge in the Florida Panhandle and the Big Bend. If you have not evacuated already, make sure you please do so within the next several hours, as this storm surge is going to be unsurvivable in the Big Bend region. Taking a look at the latest tropical storm force wind speed probabilities, tropical storm force winds are pretty much guaranteed across most of Florida and Georgia, into eastern Alabama, even southeastern Tennessee, and western South Carolina, as this is going to be a very powerful storm moving very fast inland. Taking a look at the rainfall accumulations from the Weather Prediction Center, looking at 1 to 2 inches of rain in the light green, 2 to 4 inches of rain in the dark green, 4 to 6 inches of rain in the yellow, start to see flooding problems in the yellow shaded area across eastern Alabama, most of Georgia, much of Tennessee, western Kentucky. And then as we start going to the darker yellows, looking at an additional 6 to 8 inches of rain where Helene comes ashore around Tallahassee, up to 12 inches around Panama City Beach. And then the biggest flooding concern, in my opinion, is going to be up near the mountains, the Smoky Mountains and Appalachians of western North Carolina, South Carolina, and northeastern Georgia, where you could be seeing as much as 6 to 18 inches of rainfall. Additional rainfall from which has already fallen from Hurricane Helene, likely resulting in catastrophic flooding across western areas of the Carolinas and northeastern Georgia. This is not really being talked about much, but I do believe that catastrophic flooding is going to be likely, unfortunately, across western areas of the Carolinas and northeastern Georgia due to orographic lifting. And taking a look at the flooding outlook, got a high risk of flooding across the mountains of the western Carolinas and northeastern Georgia in the pink. Also, the high risk across Florida and Georgia has expanded northward into much of southwest Georgia, far southeast Alabama, and around the Tallahassee and Panama City Beach area of Florida. High risk of flooding is in place. Moderate risk in the red across eastern Alabama, most of Georgia, southeast Tennessee, and the western Carolinas in the red into the eastern Florida Panhandle. We have a slight risk of flooding across the Tennessee Valley in the yellow, down through the southeast and mid-Atlantic, and a marginal risk of flooding in the dark green, extending into areas of the Ohio Valley and Pennsylvania. Taking a look at the storm surge forecast, this has not gotten any better since yesterday. We're looking at 1 to 3 feet of storm surge from Walton Bay County line through Mexico Beach, 3 to 5 feet of storm surge from Mexico Beach to Indian Pass, 6 to 10 feet of storm surge in Apalachicola, 10 to 15 feet of storm surge in Carabel, 15 to 20 feet of storm surge down through Suwannee River, 10 to 15 feet of storm surge down through Chassahuazica, 8 to 12 feet of storm surge down through Anclot River, 5 to 8 feet of storm surge down through middle of Longboat Key and Tampa Bay, 4 to 7 feet of storm surge down through Englewood, 3 to 5 feet of storm surge down through Flamingo, 1 to 3 feet of surge in the Florida Keys, and 1 to 3 feet of storm surge in northeast Florida, the Georgia coast, and much of the South Carolina coast as well. So as I mentioned earlier, a storm surge is going to be unsurvivable from Apalachicola down to Anclot River. Make sure you are evacuating if you haven't done so already, if you live anywhere along the storm surge area in the Big Bend of Florida. And I have not mentioned this yet, but we have a pretty significant tornado threat as well from Hurricane Helene. We have an enhanced risk of severe weather across southeast Georgia and South Carolina, even northeastern Florida in the orange, with a slight risk covering the Florida Peninsula, eastern Georgia, and the Carolinas in the yellow, marginal risk in the dark green, and this is driven by a 10% chance of a tornado touching down within 25 miles of a location in the yellow shaded area, including Jacksonville, Savannah, and Charleston. Going to be seeing numerous tornadoes from Hurricane Helene. In fact, we already have multiple tornado warnings ongoing across Georgia and South Carolina this morning. 5% tornado risk in the brown shaded area for much of Florida, eastern Georgia, most of South Carolina, and southern North Carolina, 2% tornado threat in the green. And looking at tomorrow's tornado outlook, slight risk of severe weather, tornado-driven, across eastern and central North Carolina, eastern South Carolina, marginal risk in the dark green, 5% chance of a tornado touching down within 25 miles of a location for areas like Raleigh and Wilmington, and a 2% tornado risk in the green shade area for tomorrow. So if you haven't made your last minute hurricane preparations, please rush those to completion. If you live across the Florida Big Bend and around Tallahassee into southwest and central Georgia, even southeastern Alabama, as landfall is just hours away with Hurricane Helene, please make sure if you are sheltering in place, shelter in a sturdy building, and if possible, in a basement to avoid the strongest winds and the damage. Thanks for watching. Please stay safe and have a wonderful day, my friends.